We've had quite a few RTX 5080 models come through our offices lately, but apart from the founders model from NVIDIA, they've all been pre-overclocked models, which of course demand a higher price point. And with GPUs still being a bit of a point of contention when you mention price, it's a tough one to differentiate as to why you should buy one of them over an MSRP card, like a founders edition. Luckily, today things are being shaken up a little bit as we have the INNO3D X3 model with us, an MSRP card that breaks the mold a bit, as it's set to rival what NVIDIA can do, being a dual slot card that should offer up kind of an alternative for those who maybe can't snag a founders model, and we're going to be putting it through its paces today. But before we get into that, here's a quick word from this video sponsor.
Oi oi, I hear you're in the market for a proper top-of-the-line monitor. Best blacks, brightest whites, sharper than a tailor's crease, am I right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Well, look no further, my son. Feast your peepers on this, the Glare-Master 5000. A true marvel of technology. Just, maybe don't use it when the sun's out.
What? That's not what I want. I was after a 32-inch 4K 165Hz QD OLED with adaptive sync.
Core blimey, we've got a right tech connoisseur here. You don't mess about, do you? Alright. I see where you're coming from. Forget the Glare-Master, that was just a warm-up. What you need, my friend, is the Aegon Pro AG326UD from AOC. Top tier gear, 4K, 165Hz, QD OLED, all the bells and whistles. And get this, HDR 400 certified. That's the real deal, no mucking about.
That does sound good.
Of course it does. I wouldn't steer you wrong, would I? I'm all about quality, me. Now, if you want to get your hands on one of these beauties, you know what to do. To find out more, click the link in the description below. You won't regret it, my son. Lovely jubbly.
Now, unlike some of the factory overclock models we've looked at, the INNO3D RTX 5080 X3 sticks with NVIDIA's reference boost clock of 2617 MHz, meaning you won't see any out-of-the-box performance gains compared to the Founders Edition, outside of margin of error or silicon lottery in terms of sustained levels of boost. However, not everyone is looking for the highest factory overclock, and in many cases, cooling, noise levels and price are just as important when choosing a card. And well, that's where INNO3D is hoping to make its mark with its X3 cooler design. Cooling-wise, the RTX 5080 X3 features a triple fan setup using three 88mm Scythe fans designed to maximise airflow while keeping noise levels down. While INNO3D doesn't market any unique fan technology like counter-rotating blades, the core concept remains the same: push as much air through the heatsink as efficiently as possible. The fans sit on top of a high-density aluminium fin stack heatsink with 6 copper heat pipes feeding into the copper base, which makes direct contact with the GPU die, while the aluminium base gives full coverage for the memory, which combined should help to improve thermal transfer. This should, in theory, help keep temperatures in check without needing excessive fan curves, and therefore, hopefully, lower noise. Now, unlike some of the bulkier AIB models, the INNO3D RTX 5080 X3 keeps its footprint relatively manageable, coming in at 300mm in length, 116mm in height, and 41mm thick, which makes it a 2-slot design, which, honestly, I feel is going to be probably its biggest selling point, because that is a key selling point that the Founders Edition has and makes it a manageable size for small form factor builds, and is a lot more compact when compared to some of the, let's say, more extreme cooling solutions that we've seen from competitors. Now, another key aspect is the build quality. The X3 features a metal backplate for added rigidity and improved passive cooling, but overall the design is more function over form. Inno have also opted to not include any RGB, which kind of makes the card appeal to, let's say, a slightly different crowd who maybe prioritise function over gimmicks. And well, that just adds to a more premium looking product too, with a, more understated look. There's no infinity mirror or excessive branding. It's just a simple, clean design that focuses on delivering performance without unnecessary embellishments. Now, for those who like to maybe fine-tune their experience, the card doesn't feature a dual BIOS switch or any other added extras, which is something typically found on higher-end models. This instead means you'll be relying on Inno's default fan curve, though adjustments can obviously be made through software if needed. Now, in terms of power, the RTX 5080 X3 sticks to NVIDIA's 12V 2x6 connector, rated for up to 360 watts of power delivery. Given that this card doesn't come with a factory overclock, power draw should be roughly in line with NVIDIA's Founders Edition, making it more of a predictable option for those who maybe want reference-like performance without any surprises. Now, INNO recommends an 850 watt PSU, but as we've said with all of our kind of 50 series content, it's pretty standard for a 5080, but if you are using a high-end CPU, then you may want to go a little bit higher, maybe closer to sort of 1000 watts or so. So, where does the INNO3D RTX 5080X3 sit in the market? Well, it's positioned as a kind of no-thrills reference speed card with a focus on cooling and reliability rather than aggressive factory overclocks or flashy aesthetics. It will likely appeal to those who maybe want a straightforward RTX 5080 without the added cost of premium cooling solutions or excessive RGB. But as always, the question remains, does the simpler design and lack of factory overclock hold up against its competitors? Well, that's what we'll be putting to the test in our benchmarks. But first, we wanted to see what was possible in terms of manual overclocking. For our overclock, we managed to increase the core clock by 310 MHz, which now gives us an overall boost clock of 2927, which is a 12% uplift over the stock clocks. Along with this, we also managed to get a 1000 MHz increase on the memory, so now clocking in at 2000 MHz or 32 gigabits per second effective. What this overclock means for performance sees us opening up F124 for an hour-long loop to be able to compare temperatures, fan speed, power usage, and their all-important clock speed behaviour. What we found was that the INNO card was able to keep up with the Founders Edition, separated by just a single degree in favour of the X3 model. The overclock did increase the GPU temperature slightly, but even at 72 degrees, it's nothing that would cause any major concern. And it's exactly the same for the memory junction temperature, which seemed to hover around the same 67 degrees as the Founders Edition from NVIDIA at stock, while the overclock again sees that get a bit warmer, but again, at 73 degrees, it's still perfectly acceptable. Now, one area that things do show a difference is in the fan speed. We all know how quiet the NVIDIA model is at sub 1500 RPM, whereas the INNO3D X3 does come in a fair bit louder, falling just below 2000 RPM, and the overclock sees that ramp up even more to try and keep temperatures more in check. Power-wise, the INNO card does use around another 34 watts compared to the Founders Edition at stock, and another 11 watts when overclocked, so it's clearly utilising every ounce of power it has to deliver a solid clock speed, and I guess that's a bit of a trade-off, as the INNO card does come in with a higher sustained level of boost, averaging around 2790 MHz at stock. Again, the overclock helps to push that further as we see the memory increase, and the GPU clock now sits at around 3075 MHz, so not bad overall. To check how things at both stock and overclock line up, we do need to look at gaming performance in a smattering of games. Starting things off with a Plague Tale Requiem. Here we see the INNO card managing to boost performance up by a single FPS in the averages compared to the Founders Edition, and 2 FPS in the lows, giving us an overall margin of error improvement. Obviously we don't see a jump in performance as we do when we compare to the pre-overclock cards, but when we manually overclock the INNO, we do bridge the gap slightly, now bringing us within one frame of the Zotac Amp Extreme and the Asus TUF Gaming. Now, something that is starting to seem like a bit of a trend with our 5080 overclocking though is that it does seem to dramatically affect the lows in certain places, and this is no exception, with our frame rate here dropping by 16% when compared to stock, which is enough to bring our frame rate below 60 FPS, and with a gap this big, you could expect some pretty noticeable stutters. Moving on to Black Myth Wukong, as we see some pretty promising results, as even at stock the INNO3D card is able to outperform the Zotac Amp Extreme. Whilst we do share the same average frame rate, there is a 4% increase in performance in the lows, which will result in a very slightly smoother experience, and for a lower price tag at that. Now, something a little unexpected though is the results that we saw from overclocking. It was enough to make the performance of the INNO outpace the Asus TUF by 4% in the averages and 6% in the lows, which is pretty impressive considering its price point compared to the Asus TUF card. In Cyberpunk, we see the INNO is again performing better than the Founders card, albeit by a single frame in the averages, while the lows saw no change at all. What's far more interesting here though is the results after overclocking, where we see the INNO now outperforming the RTX 4090. Granted, we do see only 1 FPS more in the averages, but we also see a 10% boost in the lows. Though despite these improvements, the TUF Gaming still does perform just a little better due to the 6% more frames in the lows. Looking at Indiana Jones, we find some pretty surprising results as we have the INNO3D card performing basically on par with the TUF card, but with 1 frame less in the lows. Compared to the Founders, we see a 5% increase in performance in the averages and 11% more in the lows, which is interesting given that they both feature the same clock speeds. When we overclock, we find the results get even more interesting as we increase in performance by 8% in the averages compared to stock, and this puts us closer to RTX 4090 levels of performance, though the lows actually see a slight decrease in performance, which is something that we've come to expect at this point. Starfield is up next, and here we see the INNO3D at stock managing on par with the FE model from NVIDIA, separated by just one frame in both the averages and the lows. So whilst not amazing, it's really not that unexpected. When we overclock, we do see the performance jump up again, and the INNO then becomes the best performing of the 5080s here, seeing a 7% uplift in performance when compared to stock. Once again, we do see the lows taking a hit once overclocked, with a 3% drop in performance, so not enough to make a huge difference, but it is enough to make the performance noticeable in our chart. Moving on to ray tracing, and we find in Black Myth that at stock the INNO3D manages to match perfectly with the Zotac, Asus TUF and the NVIDIA FE in the averages, while the Founders card drops off slightly in the lows. When we overclock, we do see some improvements as the lows see a single frame per second boost, while the average improves on that with 6% more performance, but that does only equate to just 2 FPS. Then lastly, in Cyberpunk with ray tracing set to ultra, the INNO comes in bottom of our standings when compared to other RTX 5080 based cards, though we're only talking a single frame behind the Founders Edition in the averages, and it does actually match in the lows. When overclocked, performance doesn't really move, and instead we only see a 2 FPS performance improvement over stock. Though at such a low frame rate, this does equate to a pretty hefty 8% uplift, though the lows remain unaffected. So in terms of performance, the INNO3D RTX 5080X3 delivers exactly what you'd expect from an MSRP card. Founders Edition-like results with no kind of real surprises. Now, it doesn't come with factory overclocks or a premium cooling solution, but that also means it avoids the price hikes that often come with those features. Instead, it provides a straightforward, no-frills implementation of the RTX 5080, making it, in my opinion, a good choice for those who just want a reliable GPU without paying extra for maybe what you'd class as unnecessary bells and whistles. Now, one area that might make the INNO3D RTX 5080X3 an appealing option is its potential for manual overclocking. While it doesn't come pre-overclocked, users who enjoy tweaking settings might find that the cooler is sufficient enough to push clock speeds beyond the reference spec. Of course, this depends on silicon quality and thermal performance, but for those who are willing to fine-tune the power limits and fan curves, there could be, extra performance waiting to be unlocked, as we showed today. The X3 cooler, well, it does a decent job of keeping temperatures in check, though I guess it does tend to be a bit louder than the Founders Edition, especially under load, so there is that small trade-off. Additionally, the X3 is likely to catch the eye of those looking for, let's say, a more budget-conscious AIB option without sacrificing too much in terms of cooling performance. While it may lack some of the premium features found in higher-end models, such as vapor chamber cooling or reinforced shrouds, it still delivers solid performance with a practical design. And is a card that prioritizes function over form, which will suit many gamers who care about raw performance rather than flashy aesthetics. That said, INNO do offer an overclocked version of this card, the X3 OC, which provides a small factory overclock straight out of the box. However, as we've seen with other models, these minor clock speed increases rarely make a significant difference in real-world gaming performance. Though I guess if you're looking for an INNO3D card with improved cooling, then there's the iTool lineup instead, which offers beefier heatsinks and slightly more aggressive factory overclocks. But of course, that all comes at a higher price point. Then at that stage, you kind of start moving into the price territory of Asus with their TUF range and Zotac with the Amp Extreme models, which do have larger coolers and additional features, which I guess does make them more compelling options, but again, trade-offs, pricing. And well, at the moment, it's still a little bit all over the place. Now, one of the probably the biggest standout advantages of the X3, it's a 2-slot design, which does make it one of the slimmest RTX 5080 models available. Most AIB cards take up to 3 or even 4 slots, which it kind of limits case compatibility, particularly for small form factor builds. This gives the X3, that unique advantage for those who need a more compact GPU without sacrificing performance. However, this slimmer design does mean higher fan speeds to try and compensate for the reduced heatsink mass. So noise levels may be, again, a trade-off worth considering. But for me, there's not really much in it. I will happily accept that to get something as slim as this. At MSRP pricing, the X3 makes for a solid alternative to the Founders, particularly if availability becomes an issue. It's a great choice for those who don't need the extra features like RGB, dual BIOS, or a massive cooler. That said, if noise levels and thermal performance are major concerns, you might want to consider spending a little more on a higher-end AIB model like the iChill range. The increased cooling capacity of those cards often allow for quieter operation and, of course, slightly better sustained boost clocks. Though, I guess as we've shown, the difference in actual gaming performance may not always justify the extra cost. So that's really a decision that only you can make. Ultimately, the X3 is an affordable, practical option for those who just want a straightforward RTX 5080 experience without the added cost of factory overclocks or premium cooling solutions. It does exactly what it's set out to do, provide MSRP performance in a compact and functional design. However, if you're looking for better cooling, quieter operation, then maybe there's other models to consider. But for me, I'm perfectly happy with what we saw here today. And the fact that it is an MSRP card, I think we're kind of going to be in that boat where you don't really have a choice. If it's available, get it. That's kind of how it goes. So yeah, that's going to wrap this one up. If you enjoyed the video, a like and a sub to the channel would be amazing. And if you want some cool behind the scenes content, exclusive game nights and early access to what we're working on, check out our Patreon. The link is as always down below. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.